Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blabbit. It's great to have you aboard for this live stream. For anybody joining us for the first time or for the 57th time, after all, this is the 57th episode of Blabbit. Isn't that amazing, Bonnie, that 57 episodes?
I'm impressed.
Yeah,
That's great.
We're just too darn stubborn or too darn dumb to stop.
You're like Heinz, 50, you and Heinz.
Yeah, excellent to have all of you who are watching this now aboard. We are hitting the ground running here in episode 57, feeling really good about it. But for anybody who's tuning in for the first time, let us introduce ourselves. We have myself and my good friend, co-host Glenn Ingram. We're going to talk a little bit about who we are and then throw it over to our extra special returning guest here today. My name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking coach, presentation expert out of New York City. I have been working with businesses and organizations and individuals about being really clear about their messaging, and then also being able to overcome some of the nerves that might be sabotaging you otherwise doing a really good presentation. Glenn?
Hey, thanks, Paul. My name is Glenn Ingram. I've been working in managing, coaching, teaching sales for the better part of the last 2 decades, and primarily helping people get over that biggest obstacle, that's 6 inches between their ears. Bonnie, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me back.
Good to have you.
Thank you. A little bit about me. My life's work and my life's passion is around helping companies be great places to work and helping people and leaders and teams be their best in those companies. So I do that through consulting projects, one-on-one coaching, and facilitating workshops.
Okay.
And I'm in Denver, Colorado. I'm from New York, so from your part of the country, Paul, but I've been in Denver for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I have actually seen via Zoom where it is you are, and that's beautiful country up there.
Thank you.
For some reason, I have John Denver in my mind now.
Yeah.
You're Rocky Mountain High.
All right. So this episode is really about conversational skills and how to leverage them. And I know when I'm teaching, Bonnie, I know what the best practices are, and I tell my clients what best practices are. And I think we all kind of acknowledge, yes, I should be doing this. But what I would love to hear from you is the why. In other words, when it comes to conversations, how do our brains work? How can we actually fall into the groove that works for us as the speaker in a conversation, but also works for the listener in a conversation? How do we process things? I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I'll answer the why question with one word, which is relationships. This is all about conversations become the currency to having really strong relationships. And everything I talk about here, well, we're talking about it mostly in a work context. Absolutely, it can apply in your personal life as well, because obviously we have conversations all day long. And so a little bit about the behind the scenes that you were asking in your question, Paul, is neuroscience. So we have these wonderful things called our brain. Glenn, you mentioned the 6 inches between your ears. And our brains are wonderful, but they were really built for one thing, and that is survival. And so what happens is we're always looking for ways to see, am I safe? And that happens at work, unfortunately, all the time where we feel unsafe. And the very basics of conversations often makes us feel unsafe. So, Paul, if I was your manager and I said to you, hey, Paul, you have a minute? I have some feedback for you. Tell me in that moment what just happened.
Well, feedback sounds like criticism. Just that word alone, right?
Exactly. So think about that one word and how often does that one word come up at work? And so, yeah, you feel like you're criticized, your brain's going fight or flight. Am I safe? The fighters get defensive. This happens all the time. We see people get defensive, especially when it comes to feedback. And the flighters or the freezers, that's more me. I become like a turtle. I go in my shell. I get really quiet. I lose my voice. I lose my power. And I don't feel good about myself. And then eventually over time, I might explode and then it gets ugly. But generally freezing or fighting, and it's not a good thing. Either way, the point is, we're not having a conversation with our best selves. And so the purpose of this knowledge is so that everything that I'll talk about for the rest of our session today is around doing what you can to keep somebody's brain calm, essentially, and this is a big word, psychological safety, to keep them feeling that they are safe so that you have a really productive conversation. And the person is really, really able to listen and process. And ultimately, we're after 2 outcomes. One is the relationship gets better. Sometimes we can have a really hard conversation with somebody and even criticize, and the relationship comes out better in the end. And the other piece that we're looking for is results. It's one thing to say, oh, what a good chat, but if nothing changes, then who cares? So all of this is about keeping the brain safe so that the person can really get those relationships and results.
Well, and don't you find that the more you get to understand personalities, the more you get to understand body language, the easier it is to have these conversations? Because I'm the exact opposite of you. When it comes to confrontation, I lean in versus out. But when you see the people start leaning back, you know that there's a little bit of uncomfortableness with it. And that's where I look at from a sales aspect with conversation. If they're sitting back, they're not engaging. If you ask them a question and they talk, then they kind of lean forward. So from the opposite side of that, isn't it important if you are a little bit more aggressive to learn the body language so you know when to back off a little bit?
Without a doubt, reading your audience, and I know that, Paul, this is so important in the work that you do, is really critical in successful conversations. And you're right, Glenn, that body language is really, really critical. Or even if you say to somebody, what's going on? How's everything going? And they go, just fine. And you see the look on their face and the look on their body that's telling you something else. At that point, get curious. You're not going to say to them, no, you're not, because then you're going to, again, you might spark that fight or flight, but get curious, ask some open-ended questions, or get really courageous and use your intuition to say, I'm wondering if there's something else going on. And you probably don't want to blame them and say, well, I see your body language. So you need to also be savvy about translating the body language and then thinking about how that becomes the next comment. But some of us ignore it because it is a little bit hard. It does take some courage to call that out when you see it.
So in practical terms, if you were to replace that word feedback, and by the way, I have spent decades as a musician, and the word feedback is that squeal you hear when a microphone gets into a loop. So yeah, feedback is bad. It's just bad all the way around.
I like the musical analogy. I hadn't thought about that.
Right,
Absolutely.
feedback. So in terms of the word feedback, is it easier? Oh, look at this. We have a message from Tim Hagen. Well,
Tim.
Guess what? I think I'm about to plagiarize our good friend Tim right now.
Please do.
Because there's a phrase that he uses, and I'm plagiarizing at the same time paraphrasing because I could never hope to quote him. such a really intelligent and experienced individual, coach. So the phrase, instead of feedback, do you recommend, is it easier, is it better to say, I'm really curious what you think about this? Is that a better entree into that conversation, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can go to a model that I've put together, and I can't promise that this was anything super unique. I think over the years, because with my coaching clients, one of the number one topics that they come to me with is this topic of conversations. And it starts out going, I need to manage up, I need to influence change, I need to deal with difficult customers. And ultimately, the skills underlying so many strategic ways to become a better leader are all about doing it in one conversation at a time. So in this model that I've created, the first step is to think about what may go wrong in the conversation. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit negative, but essentially, when we work with people over and over again, they're usually more predictable than we think. So we find ourselves in a bit of a pattern, repeated pattern with people in our personal and our professional life. So what can you expect when interacting with this person? And what questions may they have, and what pushback may they have? And in the moment, we can't always prepare, but if it's one that you have time to prepare for, think about this in advance so that you can proactively be ready for some of the things that could go wrong or where they can push back. After that, in the start of the conversation, and this is whether you can plan or in the moment, set your intention. That's about the safety that I mentioned earlier. So if I say to you, instead of saying, hey, Glenn, I have some feedback for you. If I say, hey, Glenn, you're such a strong member of this team, and I'd like to talk about something that you can do to become an even greater contributor. Is that okay right now? Can we have that conversation?
Sure.
Nice. I've done a few things there. One is I've gotten your permission, and I know it might sound a little bit goofy, but you saying that out loud instead of me like slamming you over the head with a frying pan like they did in the cartoons when I was a kid, you're now a more of an active participant. But also, I've told you that I support you and I'm here for you. So I can even just take the word feedback out of it. Great. I am wondering what's going on here. So it doesn't take away all of the lack of safety, but generally you're not wondering like, oh, what's this about? You know that I'm on your side. And you know what? Occasionally somebody will say to me something like, actually, can we do this tomorrow? I've had a really bad day and I'd just rather talk in the morning. Is it urgent? Because if we can wait till tomorrow, that would be better. Great. If you've had a crummy day and I'm going to make it even worse and you're not going to be at your best and I can avoid that, then let's do it tomorrow. So usually people would just say yes, but in the event that they want to say no, you're now giving them some permission and some space for that. So by setting that intention, it's a nicer way than just to jump in with the word feedback.
Well, and a thing that I caught from the first thing you said and then the second one, you called intention, I called it agenda. There's nothing wrong whether it be verbalizing it or on a piece of paper or on the computer saying, here's what I'd like to talk to you about, whether it be a work environment or a sales environment. Then everyone knows what's going on. There is no surprise. There hopefully are no surprises. And everyone's kind of on the same page of where you're going. And then open-ended questions, whether it be being a parent of daughters or with working with employees or sales. When you allow someone to say yes, no, that's not a conversation. So
absolutely. That is
expand on those a little bit. Really
critical. Yeah. So when people ask me, what are the core skills that I need to do this well? It's 2 skills. One is, and we've actually already talked about both of them. So you just mentioned one of them is asking those open-ended questions. And what's key here is getting curious. It's really going deeper and not making assumptions. So, for example, Paul, and open-ended questions, they expand, they make possibilities happen instead of closing down and assuming that you know the answer. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, we have been taught our whole lives to be the smartest one in the room and to listen for responding instead of listening for understanding. So that's the other piece of this is the listening. So asking questions is really great, but if you ask them and you shut them down and you're not truly listening, and we mentioned body language, that's part of it. It's really critical. Another piece is to get rid of your distractions. So where possible, the phone, the pings, the dings, really be there. Both of you right now are showing great listening skills around your body language. I see the nodding. In some meetings, taking notes is really is really helpful. It really, our research shows that our brains can really get a sense of holding on to things better, retaining information if we've taken notes. And also just the paraphrasing, summing up, understanding at certain points in time. You don't want to be a parrot. That sounds a little bit goofy, but that really helps the person understands. And the other thing is just to know where does your listening get in your way? We all have certain tendencies where we get stuck. So for example, my husband, who is a wonderful father, his tendency is he's the jokester. He grew up in a family where they're always throwing in the one-liner, and he gets blamed for having the bad dad jokes. So he's listening for the one-liner. Where can he throw in the pun? And so if our 12-year-old daughter comes home and she's sharing something a little deeper about something that happened with a kid at school, and he goes in for the one-liner, it's now about him and the joke, and it's taken the attention away from her emotion and her vulnerability, which, by the way, at 12, we may not get that back once we've lost it. So thinking about what are your tendencies? A lot of us are the fixer. We want to fix the problem right away instead of going, tell me more. We don't always know what the problem is. And by the way, sometimes in conversations, the person just wants support and they just want to vent. So notice what your tendencies are. It's not a question of good and bad. We all have them. And then do what you can to get curious and ask those open-ended questions. Usually they start with the word what, and they go from there so that they open new possibilities.
So where does humor fit into it? I mean, we all know people who have a good sense of humor, who may have a good sense of self-deprecating humor, which often makes people feel very comfortable, very at ease. So going back to what you said earlier, I guess you have to read the situation, whether there's a need for that or whether you want to make it feel like it's easy and light. It really is, like you said earlier, Bonnie, reading your audience.
Yeah.
But there is a place for humor. There is.
There absolutely is, Paul. Humor can be great at diffusing tension, without a doubt. My advice is don't go there too soon. So if that's your immediate knee-jerk, as an avoidance tactic to avoid the emotion, the connection, the vulnerability, the really hearing what the person has to say, it could just be waiting like a minute, 30 seconds. This isn't like a long wait, but it's giving them the time and space, asking those questions, doing the good listening before you go to the part of the humor. And also being clear up front. You mentioned, Glenn, setting an agenda. That's certainly important. And if it's a difficult conversation, if it is feedback, whether a performance thing or say a project team that's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, be really clear. Share your fact-based observations. Again, back to the neuroscience research. If I'm judging you and I'm saying, Paul, you have a lousy work ethic. I am judging you and you are going to probably get defensive. If I say, hey, Paul, I've noticed in the last 2 weeks, there were 3 days that you showed up late to work and that one report had 5 mistakes in it. I'm wondering, what can you do to have a better quality in your outcome? And so what I've done there is I've been as fact-based as possible. I've shared the observations. And now I'm opening it up for you to reply. So instead of landing it on you and telling you something that you don't know what to do with, I'm now asking you the question for you to start to problem solve. And what happens is we are now in a dialogue. We're in a problem-solving dialogue back and forth instead of you feeling like you've just been slammed over the head again, the frying pan from the cartoon, and not knowing how to react to it.
Well, what happens if you, going through this process, you actually open up the door too wide? And they share with you that the problem, the reason that I was late and the reason that I didn't get my report in or it wasn't up to my usual standards is because of this personal problem and this personal problem and this personal problem. I mean, that really is their prerogative to
Absolutely.
talk about those things. But in a work context, does that become a slippery slope, or do you just have to receive it with aplomb?
Mm-hmm. I think it's, again, that balance of a little bit of listening and acknowledging. So the skill here in listening is saying, I understand that you have a lot on your plate right now and there are reasons to be late. What is it that will help you overcome that in the future? So looking backwards is sometimes really tempting. But the truth is, even if I said, you were late 3 times in the last 2 weeks, why were you late? Do I actually care? I mean, you're going to give me plenty of situational reasons. But that switching from that why question, which is more close-ended, to that open-ended what question, what can be different in the future? When you feel yourself getting pulled into that, I call it like it's the energy of the conversation. Are you sinking down, down, down? But this and but that, and you're getting a lot of excuses, and you're not moving to the future, then the skill is elevating. So asking that what question, again, acknowledging, I hear it, I get this is hard, and what can you do for it to be different the next time? Always moving toward the future solution. In the past, it's interesting, but the truth is what we really care, again, I mentioned before, it's about relationship and results. We really care about changing the results for the future.
Right. And Glenn, in sales, it really is, what can I provide? So it is figuring out what that problem is through listening skills.
Well, and that's the difference between a salesperson and a consultant or a trusted advisor. I'm learning about you. I'm trying to find solutions for you instead of trying to tell you why you should purchase what I'm selling.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. What can this product do to help make things better for you? And that reminds me also a great question, but can't come too close in the beginning. A lot of managers say, what can I do to support you? What can I do to help you? Which is wonderful, but ultimately you really want the person to be accountable for their own actions. And so save that question for the end so that you're not jumping too quickly at being the savior and not actually having them come up with things on their own. And the thing is, we know ourselves better than anybody else can know us. So going back to the very simple issue of being late, if I can give you all the advice in the world of what you should do differently, but you know your life and what's getting in your way. So even if I say, where do you get stuck? What's getting in your way? That's your opportunity to go deep, because that's a gift to give to somebody. If you're going to give me the time and space to care about me and listen to me and help me figure it out for myself, that can really be life-changing as compared to you just being angry at me and lecturing me and telling me what to do. And you may give me perfectly good advice, but it's going to work for you. It may not work for me. But I call this step, asking these questions. A lot of people say, oh, I don't like working with coaches because they just ask a lot of questions and we don't get to the solutions. I call it ask first, tell second. It doesn't give away your power to still share your point of view, but asking first, have the person go deep, have them figure out where they get stuck, what they do well that they want to keep doing. Mm-hmm. And after they've come to some conclusions, say something like, those sound like great ideas, and I'd like to share a few things that have worked for me. Or if I were you, here's a few things you may want to consider. So you don't lose by asking questions, you don't lose your power to have advice. It's just a question of giving it at the end after the person has had that clarity for themselves.
Right. Well, I've always heard that the person who asks the questions really does possess the power in a conversation. Right, Glenn?
Well, I mean, if you're not asking those questions, if you're not trying to find out, again, back to the solutions versus, selling, even on an interpersonal type of thing, you're not going to find out what Paul's strengths are, what my strengths are, my weaknesses are. We're all different individuals. And if you don't find a way to accentuate your strengths, find ways to either get rid of and not do the weaknesses or something else like that, the reality of it is whatever position you're in, you're not going to be perfect at everything. But Bonnie may be good at X, Y, and Z, where I'm good at A, B, and C. So if I can take Bonnie's A, B, and C and pass off her my X, Y, Z, we're all a lot more productive and we're happier.
Mm-hmm. I have a concept, actually something that I introduce to my clients who are asking, we do slide a little bit into conversational skills. Sometimes they'll ask me, well, what words do I use? And I try not to be too specific, but if they need words that help them launch into things, I will give them. And one of the things that I noticed is when people need to make a decision, and I don't just mean this in regard to sales, but also a decision about engagement or a decision about making a change, sometimes it's important to introduce a third party into the conversation so that you give that person the distance that they need to be able to make that decision so it doesn't feel like it's that personal. In other words, I've been hearing from some of the other representatives that this is going on. Have you experienced anything like that? That sort of a question. Does that come up in your training as well? I'm sure a certain sliver of it. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, So part of what you're talking about is the word perspective. We get stuck in our own heads. And so getting another perspective is really helpful. An example that comes up often is you need to give somebody, and again, that word feedback, about their presentation, how they did in a presentation. And I may say, Glenn, I noticed during that presentation that you didn't make eye contact with the customer and didn't answer their questions. What do you think the impact was on their experience during that presentation? So to put yourself in the shoes of the receiver by asking that what question. Sometimes when people feel stuck about how to solve a situation, I might say, well, who do you know that does this really well? And what are some of the things that they do? And just to get that perspective of observing others is useful. And the other thing with perspective that sometimes helps is, and this is a great thing to do if you're having difficult conversations, is asking somebody, you know what? Let's get out of the details of today. We're going to picture that it's a year from now. And our team we've met or exceeded our goals, and we're doing everything amazingly well. Let's talk about what does that look like, and what are the things that we put into place to make that happen. So sometimes we can get really stuck in today's problems, but all of a sudden being in a visionary place of imagining a year from now is another form of that perspective where you can get a little bit unstuck.
Well, and you mentioned difficult questions, and kind of back to that statement Paul made about the person that's going to unload everything that's happening with them personally. If you have someone that you're having a difficult conversation with that is probably more inclined to talk about the personal and go on and on, would you frame that question differently and say, I've noticed you've been late for work twice this week and stuff like this. Is there something here in the office that's creating problems from you to try and get the conversation towards the work and away from the personal?
I like your question. I'm going to tweak it a little bit for a few things. So your question was close-ended. There is a yes or no answer in that. Mm-hmm. And it's way too easy for me to say, no, everything's fine. Mm-hmm. So that magic word, what, is just a nice way to open it up to possibilities. The other thing is with an open-ended question is it is not leading. So thinking about a way to ask it in a way that's more like, hey, what's going on for you right now that might be getting in your way? Or what can you do? And it's often to frame it in the positive is more, you'll get a better response. So what can you do to make it easier for you? If you find that that's not working, then you can go to where you're getting stuck, what's going on that's hard for you right now. But often people respond better to the positive framing of what can make that more successful for you, what can make that easier for you, that kind of thing.
Okay. Now, it seems that very often, and we all perceive this, and it probably is true, that these conversations happen in the moment. They are spontaneous. So how can we possibly practice this? Mm-hmm. How can we possibly build these skills? Do you have some advice you can impart to us, Bonnie?
Yeah. Well, first of all is observing and noticing. So noticing those listening tendencies. Also noticing people around you who are really good listeners. And I ask people this question almost every day. It comes up with my coaching clients or in workshops. Who around you at work or in your personal life are a really good listener? It really breaks my heart. You know how many people say nobody? So if you have the joy of having people in your life, and some people say, oh, my grandmother who's no longer with us, but I remember we'd sit at the kitchen table and it was like nobody else mattered but me. And she just had all the time in the world for me. So maybe you don't have all the time in the world like grandma did, but what was underlying in that real care in the listening? So notice people around you and then notice your own tendencies. And this is not major. It seems like it could be really time consuming, but truly, if you just do what you can. I mean, for me, I know like with my children, I will just put down the phone, put down the dish that I'm washing, give them my undivided attention, give them the eye to eye. So often we do so much multitasking. We're so distracted. That's another good way of practicing. With the open-ended questions, Google. There's so many. If you just Google search for powerful questions, open-ended questions, I'm not suggesting you script these conversations. That's not going to work. There's a spontaneity of flow. You may feel like I'm in control. I got this thing. I've written it all down. That's not how life works. It's not so neat and tidy. However, if you have even one or two open-ended questions in your back pocket, a few that you really like, the rest of them will naturally come. And then just becoming a student of yourself, you'll start noticing, my clients do this all the time. Oh, I'm going to ask a question, and then they'll correct themselves and go, that was close-ended. And you know what? Not a big deal. This isn't like heart surgery and somebody's going to die on the table if you ask a close-ended question. You just notice it and you get better the next time, and you become aware of using that word what. So hearing yourself over time, getting better. And when you can, taking a few notes to prepare. What is my intention? What's my fact-based observation? What's one or two questions? It can take 5 minutes or less to prepare for difficult conversations, and the payback is really worthwhile.
Now, I'm going to stop recording, Paul, before I say this real quick, because I don't want everyone to know it. But it's a trick that we've used in sales for years, and it makes most people's toes curl. Role play. Whether it be with your child and they're saying there's an issue with their teacher, and you say, okay, let me play the teacher and ask me the question. Let's see how it works. In the workplace, you may have peers that you can say, hey, I wanted to kind of do a role play with you. Can we go over this? Because I promise you, as uncomfortable as the first one is, when you do it for real, it's a lot easier because you've already done it before.
I agree. And even if it's really, if you either don't have the trusted person in your life to role play with, or it really does make you sick to your stomach, even just saying it aloud in the car, in the shower, in the mirror, just saying some of the words aloud will help you. You know, sometimes we say something and we're like, that's not how I wanted it to sound. It sounds different once it's come out. So if you've had that moment to practice, I'm with you, Glenn. It can be really powerful to do that.
So if you notice that you've said something in an incorrect manner, maybe you've posed it as a close-ended question, can you literally course correct right there and say, well, wait, no, that's not what I meant. And I think a lot of people are afraid to show that vulnerability, as if I did say it, I can't take it back, but I can course correct.
I'm all for that. I think you have to use it sparingly. You can't keep using it repeatedly. It gets a little old, but certainly once or twice in a conversation to say, I'm going to rephrase that. I don't like the way that came out sounding. That was not my intention. My intention was this, and therefore I'm going to ask it a different way. What would be a different way to consider that in the future? And that goes along with that self-awareness when you're hearing yourself and noting how it sounds. I think it's a really wonderful life skill to hear it and then do that quick course correct. I'm all for it.
Right. Now, in reality, isn't showing that you're willing to correct yourself, isn't that very engaging as well in terms of conversation? Just the perception that, oh, okay, this person is being a human being. They're not just delivering information or the edict from on high. They're interacting with me. They're concerned about how I might receive what they're saying. Absolutely.
And the underlying characteristic in there for me is humility, that you're showing that you're humble and you're not like, because sometimes we have this power dynamic in conversations. I'm right and I have all the answers and you're wrong and you have to fix yourself. That doesn't feel good for anybody. So whatever you can do to be human to human, we've all been there on both ends of that conversation. So that humility, and if you are the one who is in a little bit more of a power place, either you're the boss or you're the one who's upset, it definitely shows that you're being humble and in showing that I want this to, that's not the way I wanted it to come out. I'm going to switch it up a little bit.
Well, and you can even use it as a stepping stone. I can say, Bonnie, how do you like your printer? And if you say, I like it, say, you know what? I'm thinking about getting one. Can you tell me what you were thinking about when you purchased that one? Because again, you're taking it from step A to step B to step C. There's a lot of different ways to get to that open-ended question. And maybe sometimes you have to kind of get someone talking, especially if they're pretty quiet and reserved.
Absolutely. And another questioning technique is sometimes to make it an open-ended question, but with fewer possibilities. So for example, if I was trying to plan a vacation and I said, hey, Paul, where should I go on vacation? You would think, Bonnie, I don't know you all that well. And are you more, do you like museums or adventure or beach or the woods? Or so it would be way too broad of a question. If instead I said, hey, Paul, what's the best vacation you ever took?
That's very easy to answer.
Yeah, I'm making it, open-ended enough, but I'm also taking all the possibilities in the world, and I am helping your brain to distill to something a little bit more specific. And by the way, I'm also engaging you on a more personal level. I'm now making it about you. So ultimately, it can help feed my decision, but I'm making it about you. So this is actually connecting back to my point about relationships. This is probably strengthening our relationship a little bit more, giving you a chance to share something really nice and special about yourself and your life. And at work, where this may show up is, instead of saying, what can you do differently? It could be, what's one thing that would really move the needle for you? So when we use language like, what's one thing? What are two things? What's the best? What's the most obvious? What's the easiest? Our brains get really overloaded with too many options. And all of a sudden, we're making it a little bit easier to zoom in on more valuable options.
Yeah. So it's not just a matter of don't make people feel defensive. Also, don't make them feel overwhelmed. Because the first question sounded like, can you give me a list of 24 places I could possibly go? And then it becomes work. Whereas
good point.
if I give you my opinion about the best, it just immediately takes me to a much more colorful place in my mind. And therefore I'm able to interact more easily.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if you're getting that blank stare from somebody at work, you want to ask them about their development in their career. Where do you want to be in 5 years? And you get the blank stare. Maybe the question is, what do you love doing? And what can I do to help you support doing more of that? So the other thing with questions is almost, and this is a little bit of the role playing that you were mentioning, Glenn, but almost try it on for size. Like, well, how would that land for me? Would I hate that question, or would it get me thinking? Ultimately, these questions should be almost like a little spark to help thinking in a different direction instead of feeling like really heavy and really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Is some of it the rule of give before you get at times? Maybe giving your perspective, but then being, as we said much earlier in this episode, being curious, being interested. I'm interested in what you think, or I'm curious about what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So one example of that is people say to me, I give presentations at work all the time, and then nobody responds, or I get silence. And especially now with video, are they multitasking? Is everything great? And so I say, share the information and then ask them what really resonated about what I just said. What gets you excited? What did I leave out? So that way of, you're giving the information, but then you're also giving them the opportunity to be responsive in a thoughtful way instead of not knowing what the silence is about.
Well, and what do you think about a technique that you might have seen on here before, where a question is asked to you, then the person speaks a little bit longer to give you a moment to process the question, so you're not on the spot and just, here's the question, give me the answer. You may have seen that here before.
I have a tendency to ask very long-winded questions, but there's a reason for it. And Glenn hit the nail on the head. The reason is that you give the person who you're asking the question to time to formulate what their answer might be. Now, Bonnie, everything that you're talking about right now is a perfect example of that. You are giving multiple questions that really are asking the same thing when you give those examples. So that's a perfect example of really asking the same question, but just allowing the person to start to formulate a response, which makes them feel more comfortable and more willing to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a few thoughts on that. One is it's not a bad technique, as long as you make sure that you've made the question clear at the end, because especially in a difficult conversation situation, we get nervous and we just get really chatty. Oh, yeah. And I'll say, so I'll give you the feedback. I'll share the observations. And then I'll say, so Glenn, what would be a better way of doing that the next time? Because I know how hard this can be. And last week I was in this meeting and it was really hard for me. And well, that reminds me about when I was in 3rd grade. And we go on and on and on. And the person's like, what was the question? so as long as you, at some point, I just call it land it and leave it. Make sure that they're clear. Even if you get a little longer winded, you're not adding in a story with the question. Land it and leave it. And the other thing is, when you are the one that's receiving the question, it's okay to say, I'd like to take just a second to think about that. It's okay. You don't have to immediately be on and ready to go. And especially introverts, I get this from my coaching clients all the time of they're in meetings and there's a lot of talking and they're like, I can't chime in. I feel overwhelmed. And I'll say, you can ask for a moment to just collect your thoughts. It's okay. And again, use it sparingly. At some points, you can't do that through an entire hour-long meeting, but you're human and you're allowed to not have the immediate brilliance in the moment.
Well, that brings us just one more quick question, Glenn. That brings me to one of the techniques that I do offer up to my clients in terms of actually negotiating meetings. And that is, no matter what it is that you have to say, the moment where it connected, where you thought of it, and then the moment where you speak it are two different things. Therefore, you always have to give yourself permission to retrace. And that requires reframing sometimes, whether you're reframing back to the topic or you want to go even higher level, go back to the person who actually said the thing that sparked, because that's another level of engagement. Just, reference them with words and with body language, and then your point will come across. But everybody is retracing. So I never want anyone to feel held back because they think, oh, the moment has passed.
Yeah. And the last piece I'll say is we have the moments where later that night, the next day, we rethink and we go, I don't know if that landed the way I wanted it to. Again, it's all about relationships. It's not just about, well, the conversation's over. If it's an important enough relationship, circle back, call the person and say, I just want to make sure we're okay with that conversation. I don't know if my point landed the way I wanted it to, or I had an additional thought afterwards. And it's not about belaboring it and getting more defensive. It's just that one conversation was a stepping stone, and feel free to make it as a door opener to another, especially if it's been in a big group and you're not sure how it landed in the group and you have a chance to close it one-on-one. By all means, when you're having that nagging moment, should I, shouldn't I? My advice is go for it, pick up the phone and clear the air with the person. You won't regret it. It will only strengthen your relationship. It won't harm.
Well, and back to your point about taking a moment, from the other perspective of the person that's maybe their brain works a little bit quicker than the average person. I was advised for probably 25 to 20 years ago by my better half, just because you know the answer, don't blurt it out. Take a moment, breathe, to give the person, let them understand that you've actually thought about what they're saying before you respond.
The space of holding that space for somebody and listening so that they can share, they can vent, they can get those ahas, especially with the people that we love the most in our personal lives, can be such a gift. We want to jump, we want to help, we want to solve, we want to fix, but that's not always what the other person is looking for.
Well, speaking of gifts, your return here to Blabbit, Bonnie, has been a gift to us today. And I just want to let everyone who's watching this live know that somebody really needs Bonnie right now. So she has to go. I'm sorry that she has to go, but Glenn and I are going to stay on and continue the conversation about conversations. But if anybody needs to get in touch with you, Bonnie, please let our audience know how they should go about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. My full LinkedIn name with my maiden name is Bonnie Handis Davis. So please reach out there. I would love to have a private chat or set up time to continue to talk. And thank you both. The program is great and it's so fun to get this time with you. So I really appreciate it.
You make it greater.
Thank you both. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Bye.
Well, that was fun.
It was great. It's always good talking with different people with little different perspectives.
I know. And you start to see all the threads coming together of the things that we've talked about. I thought it was so serendipitous that Tim basically chimed in. He was watching earlier. I'm not sure if he still is, at the same time that I was actually hearing words that he had said on Blabbit echo through my head. So, I had to give him a credit on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's going on new with you with conversations and different things like that, Paul?
Well, interestingly, I had a really interesting summer, and I know that you and I, we talk on a regular basis, but I don't really go into a lot of details about some of the other clients that I work with and some of the other organizations and whatnot. Sometimes I do, and they're all really wonderful. But I had a really heightened experience this past summer, and that was that I had an opportunity to work with a lot of college age students who were looking to improve their interview skills, primarily for summer internships, which they were having difficulty nailing down or getting an offer for. And some of them were going to graduate or had recently graduated, and they wanted job interview skills, just how to do that, how to stand out, and how to be unique. So I knew that I could help them, and I worked with quite a few. It was just the summer of college students for me, whereas other summers had not been all that much, mostly business people and individuals and companies and organizations. It was amazing how many of them, 60% plus, nailed the very next interview that they went on based on this training that we had done. And it was not really overwhelming. Basically, I saw the connection, I saw the steps, I knew the steps ahead of time, but I really refined all of them over the summer. And I realized that there are so many students out there who could use this help. And it's not standard answers to standard questions. Yes, there are standard questions because that's usually the game plan that interviewers follow. But making sure that the answers to those questions are unique and make the interviewee stand out is really a big, big deal. And I realized after the fact that I actually had never given this to my kids, and I should have.
Mm-hmm.
I could have and I should have, but I didn't. And they would have benefited from it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always interesting. It kind of seems like from that age, as we get older, we're a lot more coachable and adaptable at that young age, and we can catch on to those things quickly and really be a chameleon. And it seems like we lose some of those skills as we get older, don't you think?
Yes, I think that we do. And, just going back, I want to say in my own defense that even if I had offered those skills, I doubt my kids would have wanted to listen to their father.
Mm-hmm.
So I could have imparted a lot of knowledge, but as parents all know, sometimes you need somebody else giving them that advice. There's just too much personal judgment that goes in there. There's too much history of we've been interacting in this way, and maybe going back to what Bonnie was talking about, conversational skills. Maybe it's that we're too much dug into our ruts in the road, and it's hard to bounce out of it and suddenly become teacher and student, whereas it's parent and child. So anyway, I'm getting started. I'm starting to offer it to many, many people. I'm going to start up a new training group in October and see where it all goes. I mean, I'm so happy to be able to help. And I'm so excited that so many of these young professionals are they're standing out. As they should. Always really intelligent, really ambitious, but it's just that little interview skill, knowing what to talk about and how to talk about it. It's a 1 degree of separation. That's all it takes.
Well, have you given any thought, or do you have any experience with that 30-year-old that's doing the interview? Because what frustrated the bejesus out of me in my 30s when I would go in for an interview was I wasn't hired because my hair looked a little bit more like my color than your color, and I didn't have enough gray hairs for experience. So for that person that's 30s competing against the 40s, what type of suggestions or advice would you give them during the interview?
Well, it's interesting. We have perceptions about people, college age people, which is no experience, but lots of ambition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then people who are in their 40s, lots of experience, and, show me what that experience is. There's more of an expectation. You're right. There's a middle ground in your 30s where you have to walk the line between still projecting that enthusiasm, the enthusiasm of youth, but also having an understanding of what that experience is. I always say there are really only 4 boxes that need to get checked. And this is going to sound very methodical and very, very much compartmentalizing everything, but it sort of happens in an organic and natural way. And those 4 boxes that have to be checked off in a listener's or an interviewer's mind are: does this candidate have experience, ability, aspiration, and I forgot what the 4th one is. Experience, ability, aspiration, and understanding. There we go. There's all 4. I put them in a slightly different order than I speak them. So old dog, new tricks. So those are the 4 boxes that have to get checked. And I don't think that goes away. I don't think that those are the boxes for a college age student, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old. And the best way to do that, Glenn, storytelling. It's the best way. So we put all of those things together and we figure out what are the stories that define you. And there's your standout right there. Because nobody's lived your life. Nobody's done the kind of things that you've done. And nobody can talk about it in the kind of important detail that you can. So some of it is recognizing the stories. Some of it is understanding the most impactful structure for storytelling. And then working on giving yourself permission to actually use those stories.
And if you're with the right interviewer, finding a way to, again, make it more of a conversation than an interview.
Yep. And there are, I always tell everybody, there are tripwires. There are trick questions and trick requests. 2 of my favorites that I think every human being in mankind understands. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself, which is a request, not a question, but it is a trick because nobody wants you to start from where you grew up and take them through the chronology. But most people think in those terms, but you can't do that. The other thing is when somebody says, well, walk me through your resume. Trick question. I've already seen your resume. Don't rehash. Nothing says boring faster than walking through your resume. I would say that's a trick request.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So you got to watch out for that stuff too. And not be pulled in because of the authority figure, the person who's going to decide whether you're the right person, whether you're one of the top candidates or not, has a lot of power. So you want to give them what they want. How often have you heard people who are either preparing for an interview or maybe debriefing after an interview and saying, oh, I hope I told them what they wanted to hear? Nope. They don't know what they want. As soon as you embrace that, then, well, no, they do want to hear experience, understanding, aspiration, and ability. But as long as you check those boxes, then yeah, what they want to hear is coming from you. So, but it's not that easy to give people, for us to give ourselves permission. Oh,
John said the 4 golden boxes stand true forever.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It always counts.
In this day and age with LinkedIn, with different things like this, why wouldn't you if you know who you're going to be interviewing with, do a little bit of research upon them? So you know things that maybe they're into, where they went to school, because I really don't think an interview is any more different than a sales process. People work with who they know, like, and trust. So the more you can build up that like and trust with some similarities, maybe that you find out that they like water skiing, and you can make the comment when they ask about your background. I enjoyed growing up on a lake. I did A, B, C, and D. Oh, you water skied too? There's no reason why you can't lead them down the road to connections.
Well, it's interesting, Glenn, that you bring that up, because what I tell all of my clients is you have to do your due diligence, but I always treat it as icing on the cake. Because too often what we do is do the due diligence, look for the connections, and then go, there are none. I don't have anything to talk about. No. Having something, if you happen to grab something that does make sense, that's great. And you should not leave it off. It should be the icing on your cake. It should be that additional thing. But really, they want to know about you. And certainly that's an important thing. But I always caution everybody, if you go through that due diligence and then you don't see a connection, don't get cold feet. Because really, you need to have the stories that define you in your back pocket.
Exactly.
And know how to jump into them out of any question. So when I say, do you want the answers? Do you want the right answer to every question that interviewer is going to ask you? I'll tell you what they are, and then you'll know.
Yeah.
And they're not my answers. They're yours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to just talk. Because you know what I have explained to my children and other people in the world? Guess what? When you walk into that room, you don't have the job. If you walk out of the room without it, you haven't lost anything yet.
Ooh, I like that. That's really good.
John says, on top of the 4 boxes that you offer, there are 2 fundamental skills to nail in an interview. No fear and be clear.
John. Thank you, John, for that, for showing that you understand what it's all about. That's right. I'm famous for saying dealing with the fear and being more clear is everybody's biggest obstacle when it comes to interviews, when it comes to public speaking, when it comes to doing presentations, any of that stuff. So really just going back to the stories that define you, if you know what you're going to talk about, that eliminates a lot of fear. Isn't fear, the definition of fear is the anticipation of the unknown? Well, if you remove the unknown, it's anticipation of the known. That sounds like getting ready for a vacation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you know where you're going.
Exactly.
So really important. If you have anticipation of the known, fear starts to go out the window. I'm not saying that you're not going to be a little bit nervous, because when something's important, we feel that excitement. But I always tell everyone there's a very thin line between nervousness and excitement. You hear it all the time, Glenn, right? In sports, right? The big game, the Super Bowl. Well, what do how do you feel about this game? This all important end of the year championship game coming up. Most of them who have worked with sports psychologists know to say, I'm really excited, rather than doing a double take on the potential of being nervous, because you can't possibly be able to do the things you need to do at the highest level if you're nervous.
Well, and you've heard it from time and time again from players, and it's the same thing for when you're going in for this interview and stuff like this. If there are no butterflies in your stomach, you're probably not excited about it. But as soon as you get in the game and have one play, as soon as you get in there and answer one question, it should be, okay, now I'm in just mode. This is what I do. This is how I'm going to do it. Let's have a conversation. Let's play football. Let's play basketball, whatever it is. It's time to just turn it on and go. Yeah.
And so many people, when they go into a situation like that, they go into an interview saying, well, let me see. Let me wait and warm up. Let's see. Let's, as you said, let's make it into a conversation. That's a great agenda. That's where you want to go. But you want to show the kind of confidence right in the beginning. Don't wait 5 minutes to warm up, because guess what? That person's first impression just came and went.
Yep.
And now you're either building on it or you're attempting to tear it down.
Exactly.
Either way, you're not doing the work you came to do.
Yep. Awesome. Well, We're just about up to our hour, Paul. I think it's time to have another great Friday afternoon and visit with everybody again, same time, same channels next week.
Sounds good, Glenn. I will see you there.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.